Okay, so it's recording. Make sure, yeah, I'm gonna stop recording.
This is the Safari Google Meet combo is always scares me. We'll see if this works.
Safari.
Safari's the best browser, hands down.
Controversial.
Wow.
I do all development in Safari.
I use Safari for one purpose. It's to debug cores. That's it.
Like CORS?
Yeah.
Cross origin.
Yes, I have a tweet about this. That Safari is like the only browser that actually tells you why like cores fails. Like what header actually caused it to fail.
I just think it's slick. It's got my Apple passwords. I don't know.
It saves your passwords. That's not huge.
Yeah, but like they're on my phone too.
Okay.
You know.
That's true. That's nice.
iCloud keychains, great product. Okay. I assume audio, so I just.
You're good. Yeah, just push present. I think we're not. Yeah, you're not muted anymore. So now they can hear yours.
Share screen.
We can share you camera as well if you want.
Yeah, I'll put the camera back on. Oh yeah. All right. Back up. I should plug this into the HDMI. I really did this in the wrong order. We'll get this connected here.
Changing the aspect ratio.
Hold on, if I can. Oh, here it is. That's better.
Bad idea.
So this is kind of going to be an experiment for a few reasons. Part of which is I stumbled on this new presentation software the other day, and it seemed kind of fun. And I was like, I got to try that. So if anyone knows IA Writer, it's like their really nice Markdown app. This is their new like slideshow app that's Markdown based. So we're gonna see how it goes. But hello everybody. I'm Oscar. Excited to be here. Thanks to Andre for getting us all together. But today I will be talking about a bad idea, or what I think is probably a bad idea. Specifically about putting a little more magic into Remix, because one of the things that makes it awesome is that it's really straightforward. There's not really any magic, but sometimes like a little bit could be fun. Specifically, talking about how to add some magic globals back into the framework for things like the request, the user, and the session, so that you don't have to drill a bunch of props down through your functions and reference things everywhere. So maybe we'll see, but we'll get more on that later. So actually, for context, I work at a company called Solv Health, where we have been migrating our consumer platform over to Remix, and it's been awesome. Our app is faster, so our SEO team is happy, or perhaps I should say Kyle, our SEO guy. Our conversion rates are higher, so our PMs are happy, and we don't have an insane Redux Saga yield-driven data loading flow anymore. So the devs are happy. So life is pretty good. And just because I'm here randomly, and this is truly like was unprompted by me, I've just gotten a lot of text messages in the past week or like DMs that I thought were worth sharing here. And truly, none of these I asked for. They just appeared. The first is from a friend of mine who kind of was out of the front end space for the last 5 or 8 years. So I never really kind of got into React, but I turned him on to Remix for a side project, and I got these texts the other day. That's probably tiny up there, but he says, awesome, yeah, I'm still experiencing the thrill of Remix. That much done so quickly, but it's truly insane how quickly things come together after swallowing my pride to read about Remix for 30 minutes. Are these guys monetizing it somehow, or are they just doing it for the love of humanity? It's like that. That's got to go on the website somewhere. Another one from just a coworker of mine who's been spending a lot of time in our old legacy app lately. Just working in Remix is so nice. Still taking some mental adjustments for complicated features, but it's just lovely. And then there's another friend of mine who's an academic getting a PhD in biology, and I got this series of texts the other day. And these are actually not about Remix. She was working on setting up Python.
I would say that sounds like David Craig.
And I just really enjoyed the series of texts. There's many more. This was all within about 10 minutes of each other. Setting up virtual environments, apparently that'll solve your issues. Wasted your whole day. So why do I include that? Because every time you see somebody go on Twitter and say that modern front-end development in JavaScript is a nightmare, remember that there's something worse. It's important to have perspective. Python environments will always be a pain. But truly, onto the meat here. Remix has some thorns too. It's no like local Python environment setup, but there's definitely some pieces of it that, as I've worked with my team and like scaling this out beyond just a couple engineers working on it, we've noticed some things that like we wish could be better. And so specifically, I kind of want to talk about a lot of duplication or like this lack of magic. So in our app, for example, this is specific to us, but on every request, we pull in the auth token, we pull in the user account, we get or set, if it doesn't exist, a session ID cookie to track the user. This is evil tech, you got to track the users, and we geolocate the IP. So that's pretty standard. This is kind of specific to us, but it's not unusual. And these are things that we want to run, before every request. But Remix, all the loaders are in parallel, which means that you end up just like doing a lot of stuff repetitively in parallel. And like, you're like, get the account for the request. Oh, wait for the location, get for the auth token, kind of over and over and over. And what really happens is you get a lot of data duplication or data fetching duplication, where all of a sudden you're sending out 3 or 4 parallel requests to fetch the account by user ID. And if you're lucky enough to have a really fast, awesome backend, that's already not great. If you say have a slower, more legacy backend that's doing like 10 joins on the users table, you're going to start to be kind of annoyed by this. So like internally right now, we hacked together a system that's like assigning request IDs and building like a locking mechanism and a cache per request so that we don't duplicate the data. And it's like, you just don't want to be doing that. Like, it's just, it's not fun. I mean, it works, but it's not ideal as an experience for the framework. And there's other weird stuff too, like little gotchas. For example, we have the session ID, right? We have a session ID and a cookie. You track it with the user for basically ever, so you can know what they do over time. If you set it in your root loader like we do, on the user's first page load, you get this problem where like, oh, well, I want to log an event in like another parallel loader. With what ID? You don't have access to it. There's like it's been set in that root loader. It's not on the incoming request because it's their first load, and you can't do it. It's an edge case, but it's a kind of painful one. And your analytics team will not be sympathetic to. So there's some weird stuff like that. Middleware is on the roadmap in Remix. It's been on the roadmap for a minute. It's in the backlog. I don't know when it's coming, but that's kind of the solution we're getting at here. Is it'd be great to have a way to just say, hey, here's some stuff that needs to happen before every request globally. But even before that, we got problems to solve now. There's ways we can kind of piece this together with tools that already exist. Remix has a cool tool called getLoadContext that lets us do a really simple implementation. So this lets you do it actually at your server layer, so in Express or whatever your kind of host of Remix is. So this will be in Node and Express here. But this is what your server file might look like now. It's just an Express route handler that delegates to Remix. All we got to do is, add some data fetching here, and then we can just pass in this getLoadContext prop to Remix and pass data through, and all of a sudden, ta-da, you've got middleware. Your loaders and actions all have access to this context value that you can read from. And like, this actually works pretty well. This is awesome. This solves a lot of the problems I was talking about. But I don't know. I'm not like satisfied yet. I kind of like, what can we do more? Like, can we get rid of more of this like drilling things down specifically and like having to pass all this stuff in manually? And I'll give maybe an example of that. Like, I don't know, this is kind of a contrived example, but like, and this might just be because I'm a bad engineer too. It's very possible. But I always find myself in a situation of like, okay, I'm getting the request in the loader, and there's actually like this function, like a few calls down the call stack that needs to do something that's aware of the request. And like, you end up having to like drill it all the way down and pass it through. And, it's not like the end of the world, but like, it's not really relevant to what you're doing, and you're just pulling like an auth token out, or there's probably better ways to do it. But I've seen this pattern pop up all the time of just like all the arguments to your function, comma request happening everywhere. So maybe we can like look at what other frameworks do. Flask does a fun thing, just import request, and that's the current request. I think they call it thread locals in Python, where it's just that object is the current request for the user. They have this thing called G, which I hadn't even seen before. I'm not sure if you're supposed to even really use it, but you can just stick global stuff on there, whatever you want for the request. It's pretty cool. Laravel does this all the time. Everything they do is these globals. You have the request, you've got auth user, you've got the session. The session one's really cool because this means you can set a value on the session without having to manually serialize the like cookie in the response every time. That's like another pain point. Remix is like, oh, if I want to use like a session flash or set something, I've got to be manually setting that cookie. It's very straightforward. It's not very magical. So, won't get to that yet, but
Big reveal.
yeah. How can we do this in JavaScript? There's this thing called AsyncLocalStorage. It's actually been around in Node for a really long time, but apparently just became stable in Node 20 like 2 months ago, and I only heard about it because someone posted on Twitter. And it's a really cool API that maybe a lot more people know about, but it essentially lets you create that same thread local context or a state store that is scoped to an async execution stack as opposed to being global, which sounds confusing when I say it out loud, but we can kind of look at a code example and see how it works. It's kind of a funky API, but you create this instance of the AsyncLocalStorage class, and then you wrap any sort of execution stack in this run method, and you pass whatever data you want. It could be an int, it could be a map, it could be an object. And then anything that's called inside that can then call get store on that instance and access whatever the data was set when it was called initially. So you can get kind of per async context this persistent state. So it's really designed for using in something like grab state per request. So we can do this in a totally different slide software because I saw something else the other day that looked really cool. And I was like, I've got to try that. And I didn't really like the way the code looked in the other one. So halfway through today, I was like, let's try this. This one might totally fail. So we'll see. But we'll see. Just this will be kind of stepping through how we can actually plug this into Remix and do sketchy things with it. Oh yeah, no, we're already having problems there. Zoom out some more. There we go. So we can just add a new middleware into our Express server that will make this new local storage object. And then before every request, we'll set up a context, like just a map, a JavaScript map. We'll get some data we want to put in it. We'll use a definitely not publicly exported function from the Remix node library to convert an Express request to a Remix request. And then we run this AsyncLocalStorage with this context value, and then we call next. And for anyone who's not familiar with Express, that's just a function that says continue down the call stack and execute the request with whatever is going to happen. So actually end up evaluating the request handler. Once we do that, unfortunately we can't just like import this from the server.ts file in Remix because Remix has a build boundary. Just the way it's set up, it's kind of doesn't quite work like that. But we can just slap it on global. So I'll just put it on global.data and I'll kind of pass this object through before I call the Remix request handler. And then in your Remix app, you just go in and you can make a little function that just pulls it off the global object, name it something fun. And once we have this, we can really go in and say, all right, I've now got a function called request that calls this global context, gets the request object, types it, or user. And now we can just have a ton of fun, depending on what your definition of fun is. But you could, for example, and you shouldn't really ever do this, but you could just not use the request param in a loader and use the request function instead, because that'll resolve the exact same thing. Or like more specifically, you could be in some other module wanting to write a helper function that is still relevant to the request relative to the request, but maybe you have an API like we do at work where it needs a different auth token per user. So it's, scoped to the request, we just have a specific auth token, and you can put it in there. Or you can just have a global user object that gives you the currently logged in user, or something like that, and use it for some API endpoints that are specific to the user. And that's pretty much it. You can use this pattern for a bunch of stuff, I imagine, more creative than this even. But broadly, is this a good idea? It's probably not a good idea. Like global state like this is just broadly like a foot gun. Introducing magic is sketchy. And specifically, this creates a bunch of tight coupling between your API request layer, your web request layer, and everything else. And it's probably really hard to test. I'm sure if you're creative, you could find a way to mock it or inject it, but creates issues. But it could also be an okay idea. Everything is coupled inevitably. Like decoupling all of your code just never really works. Sometimes websites are just simple, and it's okay to tie things together. If your helper functions are drilling that stuff down, they're already kind of a leaky abstraction when you have to pass the request down 6 times anyways. Also, it's fun. And that's it. This is kind of like I don't know. What do people think? Are they horrified? Are they like, oh yeah, okay. That's all I got.
What is this global thing? I'm not even familiar with that.
It basically, I don't really even know that much, but it's kind of just an object you can throw things on. I think it's the same as like.
It's a node thing, right?
I'm not sure about
Could you
that.
use it in the browser?
I think you maybe could. I think it's one of those things that's implicit, kind of like the window namespace.
Oh, I see. So it's like the equivalent of a window on the server, maybe?
Yeah, don't quote me on that though. But I think it might be. That's like usually it's kind of the thing you usually have to use as a hack to make singletons and remix that survive across the hot reload cycle in their old dev server because it would tear everything down. So I copied that pattern from there, but ended up being kind of useful.
So how can it be global, but also different for each request?
That is a good question. And that is just because, are you asking semantically or technically? Technically.
Sorry.
That's basically this class does that. So when you call this async local storage,
Async local storage is a node.
it's a node thing. Async local storage is, yeah. Although I think that the other runtimes are adopting it too. But basically, anything that's called within this run method shares, I don't know what to call it, like an execution context. It's kind of in the same vein of like, oh, imagine that you're in a thread that has its own local state. It kind of acts like that. And you can treat it like that.
How did you make it global? Because that's where I don't get it.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's so the way it is made global is that in Express, so basically this is in your server.ts. So this is the thing that boots, that like handles every incoming request to the server. So for every single request, right, we have this here. This exists in the scope of server.ts, right? This request scoped storage instance. So, okay, so we wrap the call to next. So now that execution stack is wrapped in this, right? So theoretically, anything within it, if it has a reference to this object, can then reference its own local state. I'm assuming it makes up some random ID in the inside and like has a map to it. So the trick is just like, how do we get a reference to this object from the Express server into your Remix app? Because if you do that, like then anywhere you call request scope storage.get store, it'll give you the version that's set for that specific request. And the trick is just you pass it through on this globals variable. So then it exists kind of in the namespace, like you could, the reference to that exists for the Remix app to pick up on, because they are running in kind of the same environment. It's just that the Remix app is like required in as an import, as a compiled bundle. So then when you actually go to reference it in your Remix app here, you call like this, you can call get store, and that's why this is like a function and not a variable, is that whenever this is evaluated, it evaluates in whatever context it's currently in. I don't know if that's a good example. I don't know if I understand it that well, really, other than that it works.
Oh, I see what you think.
Oh, yeah, 'cause they're coming down. Okay, I have a question. So this only works though if you have like an Express server running Remix.
Yeah, so yeah, pretty much you need to have an express. Well, you need to have a node environment running Remix and like a server file that you can control, which is actually the case in Vercel too, actually. So I think you could do this on the Vercel runtime because they expose like the server.js file. I don't know if you could do it in Cloudflare. Or like if you're running on like Dino or Bun or something, you might have trouble. But yeah, I think for most anything that lets you like have access to that root request handler and has that node API, you should be probably able to do it.
Does Remix use? What does Remix use Express then?
No, they have this like adapter layer, right? So you can like run the different. That's how it works in Cloudflare. So.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. No. Cool.
Very hacky. You weren't spoiling when you said.
And the thing is, we'll probably end up using it in production. The only place you have access to the request is when it's passed into the loader as like an argument, which is typically fine. So yeah, you get and that's they transform it to like a web fetch standardized request instead of an express request. But yeah, so you can still access it there. But then the goal, I guess my kind of contrived goal was be able to access the request object anywhere without having to have it passed explicitly through the loader.
It's definitely useful pattern. I haven't even used Remix that much, and I'm already fine with it. Like I always have to like you do the same damn things every route. You're like, okay, give me the user from the session ID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried to do a command F for just like await get user ID in our code base, or like there's a lot. Yeah.
Would you ever consider pushing this to?
Yeah, no, I actually think it's a problem we feel very specifically because our backend it was built initially to be used like from a single page app. So it requires an auth token per user that's very specific, and we store their auth token for the backend in their session cookie. So like, and today I was setting up a Stripe integration, and like I called a function in the loader called like get Stripe customer for account, or like get or create Stripe customer for account. And like that goes in and like that has a function like checks Stripe. And then if not, we'll make a new Stripe customer. And like I called another helper that would make a new Stripe customer and associate it with our account in our database.
You have to set the cookie somehow.
Right. And I had to like drill the API key down like 4 layers because like, yeah, I'm just making an API call under the hood, but there wasn't any other way to like transport the actual like relevant per user token to the API client. And it was just like, it's kind of just a pain because it just gets in the way everywhere.
Yeah. Have you tried to, I'm not sure, I have no idea how Remix calls the loaders, but there's this like entry.server file, right? Which is the entry to your Remix app. Have you tried initiating the session, the async storage there?
I think I tried something like that and I don't recall, but I ran into some error where I thought it would be the first thing, but somehow loaders were getting called before it was executing, or yeah, I wasn't totally sure. I think there might be some like magic going on behind the scenes in terms of when that gets called.
Yeah, yeah. It returns 2 functions. I don't know in what like order. Could be something you could try, but honestly, I have no idea. Just a thought. Then
Yeah.
you can maybe avoid like the nasty Express JS things.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. That's probably worth trying.
Not sure though.
If you can get rid of the express dependency, I'm definitely gonna use this. But like when I saw the express, I'm like, no, this is too much for me. Like a
Yeah.
side project.
I mean, I don't think it actually depends on Express, other than that, like, you need to be like having one of the scaffolds with the Express server, right? Which I guess kind of does. Or like, I mean, you could use a different router in Node, but like, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But you need to have your own like server that you're running.
Right. You have to run the server on top of your.
Which we actually found that we had to do pretty much immediately when we went into production. Like it became a pretty immediate requirement to like not use the like remix serve package, but like, yeah, we're like, we need to change the public directory and we need to change the cache header here. And like, there was a couple things that was like, yeah, it just became easier to.
Yeah, let's see when the remix folks come out with their middleware. I don't know, but I would be very surprised if they don't use a similar tool like the async storage. Seems like so.
Yeah.
Perfect for that use case, right?
Yeah, honestly, if nothing else, I kind of just wanted to like, I saw that and it seemed kind of cool. And I was like, I want to learn how that works for better or for worse. But yeah, no, it kind of like, it's almost just like you can think of it, it's like context, like React context, but for functions.
Right.
Which I guess now that apparently React context doesn't work on the server anymore, perfect. We have a
Right.
have a replacement. Cool. Awesome.
Very hacky. Love it.
Thank you, audience. This is really like what a view of you guys. It's like everyone's perfectly spaced. It's like I'm here for my like thesis defense.